Bats represent a very peculiar duality of nature. They fly, but they're not birds. They're mammals, but they have wings and they take to the air. We don't understand enough about them to really appreciate them. A lot of it is driven by ignorance. We tend to fear what we do not understand, and we do not make an attempt to understand it. Because if we don't have fear, somehow our lives are lacking. We don't have enough sensationalism. So we imagine horrors that don't truly exist.
You know, it's tough to know a whole lot about bats and to really appreciate them on just a regular recreational level, simply because they live in places that we don't regularly venture into.
Mary, what happened?
It was trying to get in the window. A big bat.
Kids here will ask me almost nightly if all these bats are vampires, if they're going to come down, get caught in their hair, suck their blood.
They've been vilified for so long, and they have been in the media made out to be feared.
Unfortunately, the bats being villains tends to get better ratings.
It's very easy to turn a bat into Dracula, and Dracula is feared. And so if Dracula is a bat, then all bats are scary.
Why, what does it say about the bats?
Specialty seems to be killing women. My goodness, 2 of them in one night. All his victims died the same way, like their throats had been ripped open with steel claws.
It would not be sensational, and people wouldn't pay money to see friendly, appealing animals, or animals that are simply behaving in their normal way in the wild. That's not dramatic, and it doesn't bring people to the box office.
Miss Cordelia! Miss Cordelia! What's the matter? And it bit me. It flew in that closet.
The only disease that they can actually directly spread to humans is rabies. And not every bat has rabies.
And so if they're flying above you, that bat has rabies, it's not true. I think it's about 0.5% of all bats actually have the virus, and they die very quickly after they get it. For the most part, bats like to stay away from people.
Each bat in my care as a rehabilitator has a distinct personality, and I can tell who they are simply by looking at them and assessing their personality. I don't have to identify with particular markings or anything. Sometimes we'll look in those little eyes and see mischief. They have a sense of humor.
Colonies are vulnerable, basically due to the fact that they have very narrow environmental needs. What the climate needs to be within the colony, within the cave, humidity levels, those things are very specific to specific species, and if those change even by a minute amount, that whole colony could vacate the cave. And a lot of those colonies are maternity colonies.
A maternity roost is a critical place for a female bat to have access to, because that's where she's going to raise her baby, and it's a safe place for her baby to be.
When there are so many bats in a colony, they actually change the temperature of that cave. And so they need a certain number in order to get the temperature level to make their offspring more viable. Any sort of die-off could be unrecoverable, especially since the mortality rate for 1 year's pups is about 50%.
Imagine all of these organisms crammed in one tight space together can, be affected by outside influences very easily. So I think that there's the level of protection can always be more.
If you eliminate those roofs or those caves or those snags or those structures, you've basically put these animals out on the street.
The babies cannot be moved. They're not capable of flying, and the mothers can't carry them.
Depending on the level of disturbance, they may or may not come back.
If we drive all the mothers out, the babies will starve to death, and the economic impact is substantial.
In 2011, a study was done that said about $1.4 billion per year. It's called the annual cost offset of pesticide use in just Texas alone. And that's because 100 million freetails, which are in Texas, consume about 2 million pounds of insects per night. They'll eat mosquitoes, beetles.
And Mexican freetail bats in particular feed on moths, and a lot of these moths are agricultural pests.
Bats provide this free service that sometimes you don't know how good you've got it till it's gone.
We don't want to know what life would be like without bats eating all of the insects that we have. I think we would be inundated. White nose syndrome is a disease caused by a fungus, and the fungus is Geomyces destructans. It came from Europe. It was first discovered in a cave in Albany, New York in 2006.
What happens is that bats enter into hibernation in the winter in cold areas. They are affected by the fungus, which results in a white ring of fungus growth around the muzzle and on the wings, and that's where the name comes from, the white nose syndrome.
What this fungus does is basically wakes up the bats, and they completely deplete all their food reserves and all their energy. And so this results in somewhere between like 90 and 100% bat mortalities in these affected caves.
Those bats have a very low probability of coming back from that kind of drastic die-off. From that epicenter, 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces now that have been confirmed.
It will affect every bat population in the United States at some level.
The only thing that we can sort of hold on to in Texas is that maybe our climate is a little too warm for that cold-loving fungus.
In its current state right now is affecting hibernating bats, but you know, at what point does it move on beyond that? What point does it change? And I think if we don't have a good base of understanding there and valid research to back that up, we could find ourselves in even a bigger problem.
The mortality levels are so high, it's crazy. It's honestly very impressive that you have that many animals dying. You know, have 90 to 100% mortality in one single cave. That is unheard of. That's crazy. And so for those bats that do hibernate, because not all bats hibernate, it's just, I don't know how they can win.
There are at least 7 species of bats that we know of that are affected by white nose syndrome. The little brown bat is gaining the most attention right now because that's seen the biggest population losses. We cannot say this is a problem just around the little brown bat. This is a problem that could potentially affect all bat species, and we face losing them all. The volume of insects that are not being consumed on an annual basis because of all the little brown bats that have died from white nose syndrome is equivalent to between 75 and 150,000 humans weighing 135 pounds apiece. We could fill Cowboy Stadium in Arlington with the number of people. That much weight is the weight of the insects that will not be consumed by those little brown bats because they're dead. And as a result of that, I think we're going to see a big impact on human health. Diseases that have been, up to this point, fairly well controlled, like West Nile virus, will become more widespread. More people will be affected by that. I also think we're all going to get hit in the pocketbook because these bats are eating insects that cause damage to agricultural crops, and we're going to pay for that at the grocery store checkout. The price of food is going to go up, and it's going to go up a lot.
My hope is that everybody understands that bats are our allies, not our enemies. You know, I think it's just about talking about bats.
We don't want to have threatened or endangered species. I think that's pretty much everybody's goal. In order to do that, we have to start implementing smart conservation techniques. And without a base of knowledge to start with, we don't know what those techniques are.
More education about bats, more education about the environment that they usually inhabit is essential to their protection in the long run.
People need to understand the importance of wild animals to their own livelihood, their own health and well-being, their own ability to survive. We cannot afford to take for granted the life that we have. I think we fail to appreciate just how much we depend on other animal species for that life. If you look at the first chapter of Genesis in the Bible, it says that God granted Adam dominion over the animals of the earth, the air, and the sea. That dominion does not mean that we have the right to do with them as we see fit. It means that we are charged with being stewards of those animals and providing for them, ensuring that they are allowed to live out their lives, and if they come to harm through our action, we have an obligation to do something about it.